it sure is nice to come home at the end of a long day and enjoy a podcast. But you know what makes the experience that much better? Relaxing with a few puffs of smoke from my McQueen pipe. At McQueenPipes.com, I was able to find the perfect smoking pipe to suit my nerdy, yet dignified sensibilities. I especially love that each pipe is designed and handcrafted by a true artisan, and that all of their pipes are inspired by fantasy books and movies like The Lord of the Rings. Being a bit of a hobbit myself, my pipe is called the Barrel Rider, but they've also got pipes for wizards, rangers, dragon riders, or even goblins. If pipe tobacco isn't your thing, no worries. McQueen Pipes has got you covered with attachments for vaping or even cannabis. Head on over to McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout to receive 15% off of your entire order. Go ahead, treat your nerdy heart to something you'll cherish and enjoy your podcast listening experience in style with a McQueen pipe. That's Mac like mac and cheese and Queen like the band. McQueenPipes.com and use the code BIOGRAPHERS at checkout for a 15% discount on your whole order. Cheers, everyone, and happy podcasting.
I do hope you can see me today from where you are.
Ich bin ein Willi.
If I'm generally anything, I guess I'm generally miserable. This modern world of science and invention is of particular interest to women.
The people, I would say, there is no patent. Would you patent the sun?
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
Welcome to the Biographers.
Who's from Germany? Like, this is my American friend. She's like, I am not from America. You know, just because the accent is just so perfect.
Yeah.
But
I was also going to tell you is my chiropractor that I went to. So I've been going to him. It was cool because I could actually, even though he's at Kaiser, I could still go there, and it was just like a little bit more out of pocket, like an extra 10 or 15 bucks kind of thing. And he's just a good guy, really cool or whatever. And so I initially reached out to him and tried to give him a call to see if I could book an appointment. And then at the end of his message, it was like, oh, text me. That's the better way to do it. So I was like, okay, great. So I sent him a text saying, hey, my name's Daniel Newman. I used to go to treatment with you. It's been a little while, though. Literally like about a year since I'd seen him. Yeah. And, I was hoping I could just book an appointment with you kind of thing. And he responds and goes like, oh, yeah, Daniel, I totally remember you. I listened to your podcast.
what?
Yeah.
Hang on. My window just fucking... My neighbor is chopping some wood, and
Yeah,
I
no
forgot
worries.
my window was open.
No worries.
That's so sick.
Yeah, pretty
That's
crazy.
so cool.
And he was saying, and so he was like, yeah, I listen to your podcast. It's a really welcome break from all the other like finance stuff that I normally listen to or whatever. And I was like, oh, this is great kind of thing. And anyway,
Hell yeah.
I booked an appointment and I went to see him this afternoon and I start talking to him and he's, like when I walk in, he's like, man, it's crazy hearing your voice again, connected to a human because I've heard your voice so much recorded and your voice is so distinct. And I was like, oh, well, great. Thank you kind of a thing. So we get to talking,
That's so
though.
funny.
And
I love it when that happens, though.
It's
Yeah.
really cool. And he was like, oh, yeah, my wife is an art history professor and loves listening to the podcast, especially whenever we go on road trips. So when we go on road trips and long drives, we'll listen to the podcast together. And he said that, like, last summer, he and his wife went on a trip around the Mediterranean. And he was, like, listening to the Leonardo da Vinci series.
Yes!
And was like, oh, I know that. I've been there. I've seen that painting. Like, there was
so
one
cool.
where he was saying, like, as you move, the perspective changes when you look at it or whatever. And he was like, I don't even have to look. I know that painting. I've seen it in real life. Like,
That's so cool.
he was all excited about it. So I thought that was just really cool.
That's awesome.
And it was also flattering that it was like, dude, one, it's been like a year. Two, I can only imagine you have 1,000 patients, right? That come in and out of your
Yes.
door all the time. And when I'm like,
Somebody's been like, yeah, listen to my band, or listen to this, or listen to that. And then he managed to, like, click on our stuff and was intrigued.
and not only
Which
that,
I
but
love.
enough that he's like, oh, Daniel, I totally know you. Hey, how's it going? I love your podcast. Like, it's pretty cool.
That's
It was
cool.
pretty cool, right?
That's cool. Also, like, Da Vinci will always have such a special place in my heart. Maybe it's because it's the first podcast. Maybe it's because one of my favorite historical characters. of all time.
Totally.
My voice acting was, I think, has gotten a lot better since Da Vinci, but the content and the story and the magic of him as a character, I love Da Vinci. He's one of my favorites.
Awesome. And it was a great series, too. Well, should we get going into it here?
Yeah, sure.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to The Biographers. My name is Daniel Newman. I'm with Akiva Miola.
Hello.
We're about to get going onto Pancho Villa Part 4. Before we do, though, always just one or two things to touch base on. First and foremost is going to be if anybody is enjoying the show, wants to give us some support, you can do so by going to our Patreon page, patreon.com/thebiographers. Give us a little couple of shekels if you're feeling so inclined.
Yeah, man. Let's do it.
And then I'll also put a little quick little bookmark into there to say, if anybody wants to also give us a positive review somewhere, that would be nice and appreciated. We've seen like an uptick in them recently or whatever, so I feel like me even just sort of saying, hey, everybody, if you're liking the show and you feel so generous, I feel like it's akin to me being like, go ahead and smash that like button, like and subscribe. But
do
hey,
you remember when that was like, you were a sellout if you did that on YouTube, and now every YouTuber has like 30 sponsors. Remember, there like someone would be like, "It would be really nice if you subscribe." And like, "Oh, you're just pandering to the crowd. What a loser!" And now they're like, "Okay, so we're sponsored by MeUndies, Nectar, Dr. Squatch,
totally,
like all of these different brands." Yeah. So you know what? Yeah. Leave a review. Tell us that we're good. Don't tell us that we're bad. We don't want that type of review. And then also give us some money every month because, whatever.
Yay, money. Money, please.
Money, please. What you got for me today?
All right. Well, let's get into it here. Now, last time, we saw the first phase of the Mexican Revolution come to a swift and violent end with the event that history would come to call the 10 Tragic Days, or more accurately, Le Decena, or Le Decena Tragica? Tragica.
Tragica, yeah.
La Decena Tragica, I think.
Decena? I don't know how it's spelled, so.
I feel like we're going to get letters.
Probably.
Anyhow.
Letters? What old lady is listening to our podcast that she's going to have to write us a letter?
Letters are a much more fun way than saying emails.
I would actually, you know what? Yeah, new thing. Bonus points if you send us a letter. I would love a handwritten letter about, if you don't, yes, if you like our podcast, put it online. If you don't like our podcast, write us a handwritten letter in cursive.
That means we need to get a P.O. box now.
Yeah, we need to get a P.O. box.
Oh, that's P.O. Box 425?
No, I'll just put my home address. I'm totally comfortable with that being
There you
online.
go. Yeah, then people can just come and find you whenever they want to. Well, anyhow, the 10 Tragic Days, that lasted from February 9th to February 19th, 1913. Francisco Madero, the leader of the first phase of the revolution, who was then elected president, was overthrown via a military coup d'etat, being betrayed by his number one general, Victoriano Huerta, who then assumed power.
La
cucaracha. Now, during this time, Pancho had been living in exile in El Paso, Texas, but was eager to get back in the fight. Soon, plans to resume the revolution came from the now governor of Coahuila, Venustiano Carranza, who then reached out to Pancho Villa. After coming back to Mexico, Pancho became the leader of La División del Norte, aka the Division of the North, and over the course of 1913 earned a revered reputation as a ferocious fighter and military commander. His forces took the border city of Ciudad Juarez, and then the capital of the state, Ciudad Chihuahua, which made him the de facto governor of Chihuahua. But where we left off...
filling trains with dynamite, no less.
Amongst other things.
Which is crazy.
The guy was brutal.
Yeah,
not gonna lie.
Filling trains with dynamite, hopping into the train car and forcing the conductors to stop it. Like, such cool stuff.
There was a lot of cool stuff. Yeah, episode 3 was a lot of fun. This is going to be a fun episode, too. It's not quite as, like, rope and cowboy kind of a thing, but it is a lot of, like, Revolutionary War stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man.
It's pretty cool. There's some good stuff in here. But anyhow, where we left off last time, it was early 1914, and Pancho had stepped down from his position as governor after just 1 month at the behest of Venustiano Carranza. Pancho was about to resume fighting as leader of the Division of the North, but he needed funding to continue his campaign. And like many times before, Pancho would use his imagination and creative thinking to find new sources of funding.
Probably illegal. Probably violent.
Not at all. Check this out, dude. I gave a teaser last time.
Oh, yes.
If you remember. See, a few months prior, in November of 1913, when Pancho and his army were taking Ciudad Juarez, he noticed some American news crews filming the battle and dispatched 2 of his men to speak with them. Pancho's idea was novel, to say the least. His men told the cameramen to go back to their bosses with a proposition, that they film the actual battles that Pancho was carrying out and use it to make a movie based on Pancho Villa's life.
Wait, so in the movie with Pancho Villa, are there like real people being shot?
Yes. However, and we're going to get to this in a little bit. Actually, I'll save it. I won't even spoil it. All right. So we'll get there. Hear me out. Now, the idea was to go back and forth between staged scenes that showed the more personal side of Pancho's life and actual footage of the battle. Now, soon, word got back to the bigwigs in Hollywood, and by Hollywood, I mean Fort Lee, New Jersey, of course, which at the time was the movie-making capital of the world. Fun little fact,
so
it was in New Jersey prior to Hollywood. To Hollywood.
I mean, Edison might have still been... Edison died...
This would be 1914, just about 1913, 1914.
Okay, so Edison would have been dead a little while, but he was running a lot of the operations in New Jersey as well. So
there you go. And by bigwigs, I mean the biggest wig in the world of movie making at the time. The legendary, the infamous, the racist D.W. Griffith, who was just 1 year shy of releasing his notorious magnum opus, The Birth of a Nation.
I don't know much about The Birth of a Nation.
Oh my God, guy. Like, okay.
It's just like all minstrel shit?
No. Okay, so let me give you a little, quick little history lesson on The Birth of a Nation, okay? So I did watch it because I had never seen it before, and I was just curious because I was like, I've always heard it was racist, but I didn't really know how, right?
Yeah.
So I look into it a little bit more, and first and foremost, The Birth of a Nation is based on a book called The Klansman. Exactly what you think that means. The
Klansman, but in parentheses, but he's a really good guy, I swear.
It's exactly what you think it means.
But you'll like him.
Okay. Now, in The Birth of a Nation, it's basically about... It starts pre-Civil War, and then it focuses on these 2 families. These, whatever, sort of run-of-the-mill family from the North, and then a really sweet, good family from the South, who, like, really were living like literally in one of the titles, like cards, it says, like, who were living a quaint and lovely life that was no longer to be in a few years. Like, trust me, okay? My eyes are rolling to the back of my skull the whole time I'm watching this movie, okay? And then there's like this whole scene where this southern plantation owner goes to visit his slaves, and they're having the best time, all the slaves.
They're just singing songs and...
You joke. That is exactly what they are doing. They are literally all dancing. They're just doing jigs and dancing.
Like,
okay?
we like this, we like this. Oh, there's nothing wrong with this.
And I'm going to say it, and it's going to be it's going to be rough to say, but 2 or 3 of them are just sitting there on the porch, stomping their leg and eating a gigantic quarter of a watermelon.
Oh my God.
That's what we're talking about in this movie. Oh, and then to add to this, Akiva, 99% of them are just white people in blackface. I'm telling you. Like...
I wonder why. I wonder if the casting company had a hard time pitching this to any actors out there.
And so anyways, long story short, with The Birth of a Nation, it goes on to where it shows this southern family who gets oppressed by these rotten northerners, and who, like, a black regiment of fighters, come to, like, rape their women, and how terrible it is. They're all just mad at all these crazed black people.
Wow.
Because they just can't understand why they would do this. Like, this is just insane, right? And then
you know what? That's sort of it's crazy how, if you grew up in the South, or if you grew up in those areas, how that sort of dialogue it still perpetuates itself, where they're just like, things used to be good. Like, they imagine the South as like the Shire and not like the Tower of Orthanc.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Correct. Anyways, as the story goes on, it's, these poor abused Southerners keep getting served defeat after defeat, and it's, they just can't stand the fact that black people are walking on the sidewalk and saying, hey, you need to say excuse me. It's just so insulting, which all leads to the glorious formation of the KKK, who are defenders of the South.
Oh my God.
Dude, I was like... I couldn't believe it when I was watching it. I was like, I heard rumors that this was a racist movie. This is the most racist movie I've ever seen.
This is literally just racist propaganda.
It literally was. I couldn't genuinely believe it. Like, it was shocking. Like,
jeez.
Anyway.
So how is he affiliated with Pancho?
So, D.W. Griffith, that was when Pancho dispatched his men to talk to this film crew, the film crew was like, we're going to go get in touch with somebody out in New Jersey. And it all kind of came down, I'll mention his name in just a second, but there's one producer who was kind of spearheading the entire thing, and he approached D.W. Griffith and said, hey, will you produce this? In other words, will you fund this? Mm-hmm. Right? So that's kind of what ended up happening.
Gotcha.
That's how it all, the ball started to roll with it, right? So, D.W. Griffith was intrigued by the idea of using actual war footage for a biographical film and agreed to produce the movie. The project, as I said a second ago, was spearheaded by another producer named Harry Aitken, who then headed down to El Paso to meet Pancho personally. And I will also say, if anybody out there ever watches the movie on HBO Max and starring Pancho Villa as himself, Harry Aitken is one of the main characters. He's... Again, that movie, take it with a grain of salt. It's not exactly true. Elements of it are true. A lot of elements are false. It's a fun watch, though, if you ever get into it. It'll give you, like I said, give you flavor. Like a nice little, I get it. It's a little fun little flavor, right? Now, the two soon came to an agreement that Pancho would receive $25,000 upfront, paid in gold bars, with an additional 20% of all profits made from movie screenings in the future.
Wow.
Not a bad deal.
I love just old-timey business deals, just like the idea. They're like, I'm going to pay you in a truckload of gold, and then we'll also give you 20% of the profits. Like,
So that was also at Pancho's insistence, though, the gold, because in this time in Mexico, it was like that was the most valuable form of currency because things were changing all the time. There was even a point, I didn't really go over it, but when Pancho became governor of Chihuahua, he started printing his own Pancho Villa money. And it actually was doing well. But, like, it was unstable. It was like, we don't know how long this is going to be. And if we go to a different region, we're going to need money to buy things from other people. So that was why he was like, I need the money in gold. Bucks. Literally. Yeah. It's like, we don't take Dave & Buster's cards. Like, that was how some people would have seen it, right?
How silly would it be if celebrities who were in movies would come up with their own form of currency and try to sell it to the public? That would be
so crazy. I can't imagine a world where that would happen.
No one would do that.
Now, when word of the deal got back to the press, everybody seemed to think it was pretty despicable.
He's just like, I'm just going to film a bunch of guys that are going to kill each other, and it's going to be real.
Yeah,
you guys are going to love it.
It's going to be great. The New York Times would write, quote, "The savage Pancho Villa has signed a contract to share the profits made from actual battle." While a newspaper in Mexico would write, quote, "The worst part is that they are speculating with the blood of Mexicans." Whew.
That is pretty intense.
It's pretty intense and pretty disgusting. But either way, the Mutual Film Corporation signed the deal, Pancho was given his $25,000, and the filming of his battles commenced. Now, most of the fighting that was filmed was of Pancho's command over the Battle of Ojinaga, which was a brutal offensive where Pancho's army killed over 3,500 federales and suffered only 35 casualties from his own army. Think about that for a second, by the way.
That's insane.
3,500 federals died. 35 of his own men died.
How does he keep getting these numbers? I mean, are these people just like running at him with sticks? That's insane.
Yeah, because it was kind of like the United States in the American Revolution, right? Where it was like it was a different form of fighting that they just weren't used to. Right? So like the Minutemen doing these like staged guerrilla attacks, the British were like, this isn't proper. You haven't had a cup of tea first. right?
Yes.
Like, and they just
it's
couldn't
kind of like
figure
when
it out.
the U.S. went to the Pacific and they had like bonsai charges. And they're like, why are you running at me?
No, yeah, like that's pretty accurate, right?
Yeah.
Where it was like, wait, you're willing to sacrifice one guy with a grenade to kill 15 Americans? Yep, we are. And that was not quite the same, but like that's the analogy, right? Is that it was a totally different way of fighting that the Federals hadn't really figured out, hadn't seen before, right?
Yeah.
Now, there is much debate as to how the film production actually went down. Some have said that Pancho agreed to only fight in lighting conditions that were conducive to the camera, while others said he only tried to fight under those good lighting conditions and that he would actually recreate the battles if he needed to. Now, sadly, the original film has been lost, with only fragments, being recovered over time. So we will never know for sure. But of the fragments we do have, historians have seen no evidence of restaging battles for the camera. But Pancho did indeed escort the filmmakers around the battlefield, exposing them to real peril, with one camera operator later writing about one of his experiences saying, quote, "As we were filming, somewhere out of that tangle of guns, a bullet cuts its way, zing! I heard it whistle. The splinters cut my face as it hit the camera. It ripped the side open and smashed the little wooden magazine. I sprang crazily to stop it with my hands, but out of the box coiled the precious film. Stretching and glistening in the sun, it fell and died."
How sad that your camera died in the middle of combat, buddy. That's just tragic.
I didn't even think about that. That is really funny.
Because, like, could you imagine, like, he's having that at a dinner party with somebody who is in the Mexican Revolution? He's like, yeah, man, my friend Juan Pablo and Francisco, they're going to stay 22 for the rest of their lives. And he's going to be like, yeah, man, my camera actually got shot when I was there. It was
I got
horrific.
Some splinters in my face.
Like, it actually a little bit got hit me in the face. It was real scary.
It almost got my
dude.
eye. Either way, though, I do have to say, as like a camera person, that is a pretty intense story where you're like, holy shit.
No journalist, unless you're like a wartime journalist, in which case maybe you know the risks, but like, no, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Go away, get out of here.
And it is like one of the funniest parts about this that it's like it wasn't even for the sake of journalism. It was literally because they were like, we've got a movie to make, see? Like,
like, this is cool. That guy just died right there, and we have it on film.
Yeah, anyways. So it went for several months. Pancho escorted the camera crews of the Mutual Film Corporation around the battlefield, but the footage that made its way back to Fort Lee, New Jersey was deemed too brutal to be viewed by audiences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the highlights of brutality was footage of Pancho's soldiers going from corpse to corpse and ripping out the gold teeth of slain federal troops. Projectionists back in the U.S. who were tasked with screening the footage reportedly vomited regularly while showing the war footage.
Yes.
Surprise to no one?
Yeah, except, Birth of a Nation guy was like, this is awesome.
I think you're probably right about that. I think D.W. Griffith was probably like, wow, this is sensational. But yeah, it was very nasty. And there is some footage that I have seen of it. And I want to say there might be even just a small fragment of that happening, of them taking out the teeth of a slain soldier. It is rough, dude. It's not like, a good watch. So I'm not really recommending anybody go out there and try to find it.
Yeah, man.
You can, but it's like there is like actual war footage. There's one clip that does remain that I do distinctly remember. It was a small band from Pancho's army basically hunting down a wounded federal soldier and then basically ripping him apart, more or less. I mean, not actually, but figuratively, right? Like, them beating him up and all that kind of stuff. It's pretty rough.
Kind of, the uncensored pre-code film era kind of reminds me of the Wild West of the internet that you and I grew up in, where it's like, for the most part, like, even now, if you want to talk about, sexual assault on TikTok, you have to say grape,
I
or
know.
like they have to like come up with different words to sort of.
You can't say kill. You have to say unalived.
Unalived,
Like,
exactly.
Eye roll.
But when you and I were kids, you could just watch a guy get hit by a car on YouTube.
Yep.
You know, like, there was no special skill required for you to watch actual body cam footage of somebody in Iraq.
Oh, that's not true. You had to click a button that said "I am over 18."
Oh yes, I forgot.
You forgot about that. That really that amazing safety feature that they had to help
and don't
censor
get me wrong,
children's
we still
eyes.
have that problem. You know, like you'll go through your TikTok feed and it's just like, you know, an old man eating a sandwich, or like a cute puppy dog, the war in, you know, Israel, and then another cute puppy dog. You know, there is definitely some of that. But like this pre-code film where they're like, we can videotape anything, is almost the same as like when we finally got camcorders into the hands of random YouTubers.
It's true.
You know, and they would just scream World Star in the end, you know?
Oh, God. That's true. But yeah, again, not recommending anybody go find this footage necessarily. If you're morbidly curious, you can check it out. It is out there, kind of a thing. And at the very least, in that footage, it's usually in like little collections. It's usually about only 8 or 9 minutes of kind of collected footage. There is actual footage of Pancho Villa, like riding up on a horse. It's cool. That's cool to see, you know? Mm-hmm. But not necessarily the whole people shooting each other. And,
everything that Pancho Villa does for a living,
yeah,
you know?
all that extra stuff. Now, anyhow, it's said that because of the brutal nature of the footage, most of the film had to be recreated in the US, and only small portions of the real footage were able to be used. But this is also debated. Some say not really, maybe 1 or 2 bits, but they did use a lot of the actual war footage. Now, regardless, later that year, a film was released called The Life of General Villa. Now, we don't really know for sure how it performed in the box offices, as statistics were never kept well, and most of the Mutual Film Corporation's records have been lost to time. But most film historians agree that it was a box office smash hit, and one of the earliest examples ever in film of a feature-length movie.
Huh. I
Pretty
was
cool.
not expecting that. I thought because of the well, you know, it's kind of like Dan Carlin was saying in he was talking about the Roman Empire with like gladiators and whatnot, and he was like, if there was a movie where Tom Cruise and George Clooney and Leonardo DiCaprio were playing villains and heroes and they actually died, how long would it take for somebody to go and buy the ticket instantly? You know, so I guess people have always had that sort of, like I was just saying with YouTube, people have always had that sort of curiosity for the morbid and the
and not only that,
grotesque.
Yeah, and you also have to remember too that for really the past year and a half, headlines across newspapers constantly were telling stories of Pancho Villa's victories. And there was this amazing revolutionary down in Mexico who was fighting for the common man, and his name was Pancho Villa. So there was this really big kind of romance around this character of Pancho. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like I would compare it to, in a similar way, right, where like Edward Snowden, right, when he leaked all that information, whatever it was, 15 some odd years ago. And it was a very mixed bag where some people were like, oh, he did a great thing. And other people were like, he may have done something kind of good, but like, you can't be just, you know, throwing out national secrets like that. It's just, it is confidential for a reason. So there was this whole kind of like, about it. Like 2 years later, not even, they did a biopic movie with Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Snowden, you know?
True.
And it was like, regardless, people are interested. You know what I mean?
Also,
say what you will.
You got to think about the population too. You know, World War I had just occurred, right?
Not yet. Soon.
Not yet. Okay.
Soon.
I was about to say, you might have a population of people who've experienced, you know, war, but that, I mean, no, it'd be a little bit too late for the Civil War buffs to be, or the Civil War people to be in the theaters. But I guess just curiosity above everything. Yeah,
and it's the way that they did it is, again, it was a back and forth between the war footage and like staged old-timey acting of like, you know, Pancho falling in love, and there was somebody that played like his little sister, and there's like, remember the first episode, there was the whole story about him saving his sister from being raped. They did that whole scene, like acted out with actors kind of a thing. And actually, fun fact, if you ever watch the Birth of a Nation movie, okay?
Yeah.
There is a scene where they recreate Lincoln's assassination, okay? The guy who plays John Wilkes Booth in that movie played the young Pancho Villa in the Pancho Villa movie.
Really?
Yeah, same
Just
actor.
painted brown.
Probably, honestly, yeah. Probably slapped
That
a
guy
gigantic...
like that anyway.
Yeah. So, with some cash in his wallet and some wind in his sails, Pancho went back to fighting for the cause of revolution. Throughout 1914, Pancho and his army engaged with the federal forces under Victoriano Huerta and proved to be so effective that they fought well outside the borders of Chihuahua. A big part of Pancho's success during this time came from a man named Felipe Angeles, whom Pancho had appointed as his personal military and political advisor. Now, I will also say really quickly, I could be wrong. It might be Felipe, but I think it's Felipe. Not 100% sure.
Is there an E at the end?
There is an E at the end.
I have no idea. Probably Felipe, right?
I don't know, because I was trying to think about it, and I was like, Felipe, maybe Felipe. That sounds fine.
I think
too.
it's Felipe. I don't know.
Yeah. See, I don't know either. So if somebody knows the exact correct way to pronounce it, you can tell us. It's okay.
It's okay.
I hope to not offend anybody by mispronouncing his name if I am, though. Well, anyway, Felipe Angeles had been in government for a long time, and his brilliance was even more recognized previously by Porfirio Diaz, who had sent Felipe to Paris to study politics and military tactics. But Felipe always had been loyal to the cause of revolution, and now that he was working for Pancho, his skills as a military mind could finally be put to good use, as Felipe was among the only people in Pancho's army who truly understood the math and logistics of artillery. So he actually
That hasn't really
knew-
hit the scene yet.
It has.
I
mean,
they had
there's been cannons and stuff for a while. And that, to
But,
an
like,
extent,
rifled
is what
artillery
this
now.
is. But it's evolving. It's right at that cusp of moving from
To, like, the
cannons
howitzers and
exactly to the more advanced stuff. So it's like right at that point. Now, in a previous battle, Pancho had managed to score some heavy artillery from a fleeing federal army, but didn't really know how to use it. Now, with Felipe by his side, artillery fire became a key component of Pancho's military strategy. Additionally, Felipe proved to be a sound voice of political reason wherever Pancho went, helping to bolster his political favor. With Felipe Angeles now part of his entourage, on April 3rd, 1914, the Division of the North retook the city of Torreon after a week of fighting. It was the bloodiest battle of the revolution yet, with more than 2,000 of Pancho's soldiers being killed and almost 4,000 federal troops suffering the same fate. But this was a key victory, as Torreon was flush with supplies and had access to swaths of imports. Huerta was getting nervous and could sense that his grip on Mexico was growing weaker. In a last-ditch effort to slow Pancho and his army down from advancing on Mexico City, Huerta dispatched his army to a town called Zacatecas, which Pancho would be passing through on his way to Mexico City. But there was a problem. See, since Pancho had been going on such a tear, more and more people saw him as the leader of the revolution. And Venustiano Carranza, the man who had reignited the revolution the year prior, didn't like this sentiment one bit, as he was afraid that he would not get to take power after the revolution ended.
And now that there's a movie being made of Pancho here in the States, you know, for the most part, that's like the most popular name of the revolution.
That's you got it, like nail on the head. He was literally like, dude, what the hell, Pancho? Like, why are you taking my thunder? Like, it was that level of like,
and Pancho didn't really
jealousy.
have much of a desire to be a government figure at this point, right?
Well, we'll talk about it more in just a few minutes, but the seed was planted, okay? Something to remember over the course of everything that we've been doing here and like researching and talking about Pancho is that he was just a dude whose ego could be inflated, right? He was not immune to the flatteries of the heroism that was being sort of put onto him, right? Where he was like, maybe I am brilliant. Maybe I am much smarter than I thought. Maybe I could win a government over and actually be the leader of the people. You know, that actually sounds pretty good. President Villa. Like, he was I mean, we've said this many times before. He was far from a perfect guy. He was not idealistic.
It kind of reminds me of like Bronn, like we were talking about Bronn from Game of Thrones, where it's like, at first he's just like a sellsword, and he's like, sweet, I'm gonna stick with Tyrion for as long as you want. And he's like, what if I was a Lord of High Rock?
Yeah.
Like, what if I, and that's kind of where his ambitions ended up, because he was like, well, I got all this money, and the Lannisters seem to really like me. I might as well,
Yeah,
if they could do it.
I would say he's even more despicable than Bronn, to be honest with you, in my personal opinion. But yeah, it's a very similar sentiment where it was like his ego was slowly but surely inflating as time went on. Like, he was definitely liking the attention, let's say, that was kind of getting put onto him.
Yeah.
Now, Carranza's anger was only further heightened after the U.S. officially declared its support for Pancho, not the revolution. In an attempt to quell the growing support for Pancho, Carranza ordered Pancho and his army to cease their approach on Zacatecas and instead take a much smaller town called Saltillo, giving the assault on Zacatecas to some other less popular revolutionary generals. Pancho knew it was a political move, but obeyed his orders. However, instead of engaging the town of Saltillo head-on, at the suggestion of Felipe Angeles, Pancho and his army first attacked an adjacent city called Paredon, which supplied Saltillo. Apparently, Paredon scouts weren't really doing their jobs and were taken completely by surprise when Pancho and his army showed up, which led to chaos, and the city fell easily, with thousands of troops fleeing or defecting. When it came time to take the city of Saltillo, the federal forces stationed there were so terrified of Pancho's might, they simply abandoned the city, and a battle never even took place. Funny enough, Carranza's plan to curb Pancho's popularity backfired. After these two victories, he was now seen more than ever as a hero. Like,
yeah, I mean, he's already hit a legendary status.
Yeah. And now they were like, don't take this one, go take that city. And he's like,
okay, but I'm going to do it the coolest way possible.
Exactly, to where like basically none of his forces died, thousands of federal troops fled, and he took the second city he was after, his main task, without firing a bullet, basically.
Yeah.
It was like, it's ours, bye everyone. Like, it's insane, right?
Yeah.
Now, meanwhile, over at the town of Zacatecas, things weren't going so well for the revolutionary forces. The federal defenses proved to be damn near impenetrable, and as a result, Carranza kept requesting that Pancho send more and more of his army to aid, but not Pancho himself. Pancho was insulted and knew that this was all just a big political game for Carranza. After Carranza requested an additional 5,000 of Pancho's troops, he decided he'd had enough and sent a letter to Carranza formally resigning as general of the Division of the North. Carranza was stoked, as he figured he would now be the favorite of the people and the Revolutionary Army. But once again, everything backfired. The other generals protested, saying that they simply would not fight without General Villa. To this, Pancho started to see just how important he was to the revolution, and that it might just be he, not Carranza, who was seen as the true leader. Soon, Pancho began forming allies with other revolutionary forces, including the long-standing leader of the South, Emiliano Zapata. With their forces combined, Pancho began to march on the city of Zacatecas, and there was little Carranza could do to stop him. Knowing that his political future was at stake, Pancho carefully examined the fortifications employed by Huerta. The city was defended by trenches, walls, barbed wire, machine guns, grenades, 12 artillery cannons, all at the disposal of 10,000 federal troops.
Wow.
The city itself was nestled between two massive mountains, which made flanking options almost impossible. But with the help of Felipe Angeles, Pancho formed a plan. First and foremost, his army needed to be massive. So to counter the 10,000 federal troops and 12 artillery cannons, Pancho amassed an army of 20,000 with the support of 39 artillery cannons.
Wow.
Second, in order to protect his troops while advancing, the first target they needed to focus on was the enemy artillery. For weeks, the revolutionary forces assembled outside the city of Zacatecas, and tensions steadily rose from a simmer to a boil. Finally, on June 22nd, 1914, Pancho ordered the attack, with battalions simultaneously rushing the city from all directions, north, south, east, and west.
Wow.
The federal artillery stations were overwhelmed, which allowed Pancho's forces to take the high ground with their own artillery. The pressure proved to be too much for the federal forces, and Pancho's armies soon began breaching the city. As the chaos and cheers erupted into the city, suddenly, without warning, there was an explosion.
Dun, dun, dun.
Now, we don't really know who did it, the Federals or the revolutionaries, but the weapons depot detonated, killing 37 revolutionaries, 89 Federals, and 9 civilians, 135 in total in one explosion in the battle. But the revolutionaries weren't deterred and began flooding into the city. It was a bloodbath, with thousands of casualties littering the streets of Zacatecas, both civilian and soldier alike. It became so dire for the federal forces that hundreds of troops began looting houses and businesses, desperately searching for civilian clothing to trade for their uniforms in an attempt to evade capture or execution.
The Federales?
Yeah. They were literally like running into people's houses trying to find other
please
clothes.
give me a shirt so that I don't look like I'm a soldier.
That literally is exactly what was happening. They were like, so that I can try to be amongst the civilians when the city is evacuated, I'm trying to get spared because I know, like, the end is nigh, basically, is how they were all kind of feeling. It's a really intense thought, by the way, if you just give it a second to, like, if you were in that situation, right, and you were like, I'm pretty sure that if I am found, I'm dead, and the panic of, I'm going to break into this person's house to try to find clothes to disguise myself as a peasant. Like,
yeah,
it's terrifying, honestly.
I wonder how many people actually effectively manage to escape that way.
I can't imagine a ton. I mean, probably a couple hundred, but like, I can't imagine a whole lot more than that.
I mean, Pancho left his own jail cell dressed up as his own lawyer. So, you know,
true.
It's very possible.
That's fair. That's true. But finally, at 5:30 that evening, Pancho and his armies had won the battle. More than 6,000 federal troops and somewhere between 1,200 and 3,000 revolutionaries had been killed, and another 3,000 Federals and 2,000 revolutionaries were injured. That's between 7,200 and 9,000 deaths and another 5,000 injuries.
Wow.
Whew. Pancho was now the single most important person in the revolution, and it seemed that nothing could stop him from advancing on Mexico City and personally taking out Huerta. Or at least, so he thought. See, Carranza was still bitter that Pancho was more popular than him, so he ordered that the coal supplies coming to Pancho be stopped, which was crucial, as coal powered the trains that Pancho relied on. Additionally, the U.S. suddenly had a change of heart and decided to cease their support for Pancho, so he was forced to halt his advance on Mexico City.
What was the U.S.'s reasoning? Was it a plea from...
So I'll look into that. I remember I read about it and I forgot what the exact, like, the cause and effect, the trigger of that whole thing was.
Yeah, that's fine.
So I'll make a note of it and I'll try to remember to bring it up in our next office hours.
Okay.
But yeah, it was, regardless, they had a little change of heart. And they were like, no, we're actually more into Carranza now and the support of the...
And it's crazy that Carranza would, like, just flat out shoot the revolution in the foot so that he could make sure that he stayed on top.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. It's
because, I mean, to be fair, Pancho is a moving train, and either you get on or you get off or you try to find a way to derail it. But, like, if you don't stop him, I mean, literally moving train with the coal supply and all that, if he did take Mexico City, there's a really strong chance that no one is going to really give a shit about Carranza anymore if everybody only knows Pancho's name.
That's exactly
But also,
right.
Pancho didn't... I'm just... Now it's making me want to read it as well, because I'm curious, like, what Pancho's motives were at this point. Was he feeling like he wanted to be president yet?
Not necessarily that he wanted to be president, but I think there was a definite thing in his mind of being like, I want to be in control, and we'll kind of get to some other stuff here. I'm not going to cover it very thoroughly, but there ends up being around in just a few minutes here. There ends up being this sort of period of time where a convention is formed and a bunch of different leaders of the Mexican Revolution all get together and try to like decide what's the best way to move forward. And it became pretty clear pretty quickly that it was like, Pancho, you're not the guy, right? But it didn't mean that he still wasn't trying to maintain his power as much as he possibly could, because I think he was kind of lustful over the power at this point, right? For sure. Of like having the influence. So yeah, I think that was kind of where it was at. So I don't think he had any delusions that he was like, I'm going to be president. But I think there might have been something lingering in the back of his head where he was like, but if I do keep fighting and I kill enough people, it almost won't matter because I will be the most powerful person.
There's that pursuit of security, too, because the last head of the revolution basically left him for the dogs. He almost ended up getting assassinated. And if it wasn't for a last-minute phone call, he would have been. So there's this certain point where he's like, I need to stay relevant in the public's eye, otherwise I'll become a target.
That's probably pretty fair, too, honestly.
Yeah.
So, over in Mexico City, Victoriano Huerta saw the writing on the wall. And on July 15th, 1914, after just 17 months, he resigned his seat as president/dictator of Mexico, and with an escort of 600 troops, fled to the port of Veracruz and sailed away to live the rest of his life in exile.
They didn't get to kill him?
They didn't get to kill him. And Huerta, even though he only lived for like 2 more years, I think he died in like 1915, 1916, something like that.
That's true, but like once you have it, you don't really, there's no good way to lose it.
I know. But
it's always how it is with yeah.
But what I mean is that even though he lived a couple more years, he went to the UK, he went to Spain, I think he went to France for a little while, and then ultimately made his way all the way back to El Paso, Texas, where he died.
Oh, that must have been so hard for him.
That's what I'm saying, right? Is that it's like...
Doesn't it make you so mad where it's like...
It really does. It's infuriating.
Like, the biggest... This is why Batman is the most realistic superhero, because the biggest plot armor that you can put on yourself is an obscene amount of money. Like, once you're rich enough, it's like, we took you down. It's like, but you're not going to face any jail time, and you're also probably not going to die, and you're going to be able to have a vacation. You're going to be retired. The worst thing that happens to you is you become retired.
I mean, pretty much. No, I'm with you. It is infuriating. It just feels like there's no justice, you know?
I mean, it's like Napoleon.
Now, because Pancho had no funding or coal to power his armies, Carranza ordered another general, Álvaro Obregón, to take Mexico City, and by default, Carranza was now in control, at least in control of Mexico City. The revolution was successful in taking down Victoriano Huerta, but the people and the revolutionaries were now divided. Most, including his own generals and Pancho, did not recognize Carranza as the commander-in-chief, and Pancho started to get it into his head over the past year that maybe he was the right man for the job. Carranza was anti-social reform and wanted to maintain private properties held by landowners, while Pancho was the opposite, wishing to give more power and land back to the people. And they weren't the only ones vying for the seat of president. A handful of other revolutionary leaders thought they might be a good fit too. There was even an attempt made to assassinate Pancho, but once again, it was unsuccessful. Between July and December of 1914, the disparate revolutionary groups tried to negotiate, but it was all in vain. By the end of the year, the squabbles within the various revolutionary groups would escalate, and eventually they would turn their guns on one another and a civil war would erupt.
That's so frustrating.
It's very frustrating.
Because this is our second failed revolution at this point.
And it's all because they just didn't have a plan. Like, they didn't actually, when they were like, it's like so many people, when J.J. Abrams started writing Lost, and he was like, we'll figure it out in season 4. Don't worry. Just keep writing.
The same way,
we'll figure it out. We'll get answers as we go. And then they got to the end of the series and were like, shit, what do we do? Like, that's what it feels like. They were fighting for the cause, but they didn't know how to actually solve anything, which If you rewind it all the way back to Francisco Madero, you're like,
it was the same exact thing that happened
but
before.
he had a plan at least, and you guys took him out. Like,
they knew who their enemy was, but they just could not manage to figure out who their friends were.
Yeah.
And we had this with Madero. We now had this with Huerta when he finally got, taken down, where it was like, okay, we did it. Now what? I actually don't like any of you enough to figure something out. So I guess what? We're just going to go fight about it. The impetus for change was aggression and dislike of the current status quo, and not a feeling of compassion towards the people who are being abused by the status quo.
Yeah. It's frustrating all around, man.
Yeah, and it's a tale as old as time. It
is. It's one of the weird miracles. I mean, if you can even call it that. But in many ways, it's one of the weird miracles that did sort of come out of the American Revolution. Is it was like when America was like, we won. It was like, okay, guys, let's get together and actually figure this out. And if we can't agree, we're actually going to compromise. Where it was like, one of you want to have nothing but the House of Representatives. You want to have a Senate. Let's do both. Let's split it up. Now we're going to divide up the power and make it all better. High fives? High fives.
Yeah.
And there was this, and it did take longer than that, obviously.
There was a civil war that resulted later, and there was all sorts of other issues that resulted.
Absolutely.
But at least and gosh, we could go down millions of rabbit holes, but to just at least make the point, poignant. Yeah. The people were, governing the people, and the people own their own property. Now, you could define who those people were, and we can get into that. But at least the seed of democracy was in some way able to grow. Whereas with these last two revolution attempts in Mexico, all they knew was what they didn't like. And they didn't know what they did like. Yep. And, that's frustrating. That's really sad and unfortunate, and a very common situation in any form of trying to fight against oppression. Yeah, and it was also, several people wanted power and they were greedy with it, and it just ended up being to the detriment of the nation. And, again, tale as old as time. It's just frustrating to see, Mm-hmm. Now, anyways, from this strife, two factions would emerge known as the Convencionistas, or the Conventionalists, which were led by Pancho Villa, and the Constitucionalistas, or the Constitutionalists, led by Venustiano Carranza. And the third phase of the revolution would now begin. So we had the first phase, that was the Francisco Madero. Second phase was post-Francisco, all the way, the 10 tragic days, all the way to now. And then now we're entering the Civil War phase. Conventionals versus constitutionals. Conventionalists versus constitutionalists, yeah. And the constitutionalists were still, down with people having their own land. Or at least from, what I should say is, were they still cool with land being owned by the people that were currently owning it? Versus conventionalists were like, no, actually, people should have their property back. More or less. The constitutionalists were more in favor of less redistribution of wealth, let's say. Gotcha. That's the easiest way to kind of say it. Where, key to remember this, okay? So conventionalists, like I said, there was a convention that was formed, and it was the convention of Aguascalientes, I'm pretty sure is how you say the name of the town, because that was where they all met. And they all these different revolutionaries, it was like Emiliano Zapata, Pancho Villa, Venustiano Carranza, all these different people, Obregón came together, and there's even like a Mexican flag that they all signed that I believe is still in existence, of like they're all together on this, right? They're all gonna figure this thing out together. And ultimately what it came down to was these conventionalists were like, well, the whole point of the revolution was that we wanted to undo all the terrible stuff that Porfirio Diaz had originally done, which a huge thing was that he took all this land and gave it to all these private landowners. And yes, it was to the economic benefit of Mexico as a nation. Yes, we paid off our national debt, but all of the people are suffering. And that's the point. We're trying to fix this for the people. And the constitutionalists were like, we can get there, but we do have a constitution. And we can't just do that, because there are certain laws that are in place that we need to basically stick to. They're basically saying, once you start using the government to redistribute land like that, there's no stopping it. They were technically speaking like, we can do that,
but we need to do it democratically, and it needs to happen over the course of 10 to 20 years, probably, with legislation.
Yeah, and Pancho was like, no, fuck that. Everybody's, hurting now.
More or less. Yeah, more or less. But at the same time...
Also, another very common theme in so many different political and
But to be like the devil's advocate against Pancho here, though, is that it's like, yeah, Pancho, that sounds great. And it also opens up a vacuum for another dictator to come right back on in because he's not respecting the rule of the land.
Yes, exactly.
He's just
That's what I was just about to say.
It's like, freaking law he wants.
If you can just willy-nilly have the government, redistribute land, then you can just do that, and you can keep doing that whether it's right or wrong.
Exactly.
So I understand the constitutionalist perspective there. But also, what is it? I think of Winston Churchill. Maybe this is a false accreditation, but Winston Churchill said, democracy is the worst kind of government except every other one that we've tried.
Almost exactly right, yeah.
Which is like... The idea is like, that would be too slow-moving, and we need immediate action, which means that we should, consider this a unique circumstance. And they're like, well, how can you consider it a unique? Yeah, I could see how this could go back and forth. Yeah, I get it.
So anyway, I'm not even necessarily sure that I'm on any one person's side versus the other. This is where the old great compromise needs to come into place where it's like, surely there has to be a middle ground here where you can take some action now, but also cede that, yeah, we need to take it a little bit slower and make sure we're doing this democratically to feel like the people actually have the power to do it,
Yeah.
So I would say that's generally my stance on how this whole situation went down. And it's a complicated one, like many of these situations
and I'm sure there's other side alleyways and roads of political views that the constitutionalists and the conventionalists also had. Because if I just defined Republicans and Democrats by all state versus all federal, that's not a good indication of what those two political parties actually represent.
And this is coming from me with my very basic understanding of Mexican politics and history.
And I only know what you just told me, so I'm just riffing at this point.
And so it is entirely possible that if I sat down with a professor of Latin American history and they were like, no, dude, you are dead wrong. The conventionalists were so right. And the constitutionalists were, I'd be like, okay, well, hey, I'm here to listen. But just from what I understand now, I sort of feel like there's a middle ground between the two.
This is what they were debating.
Exactly. Now, initially, Pancho was viewed as the favorite, and many of the opposing armies started to experience mass desertion. In fact, when a general aligned with Carranza, named Pablo Gonzalez, left Mexico City around this time, his troops numbered over 20,000. But by the time he had made his way back to his home base in Tampico, his troops numbered just 3,000.
Oh.
17,000 of his own troops had abandoned him in favor of joining Pancho.
That's tough, buddy.
I mean, that's
at least we still got
crazy.
10. He's just out in the distance hey.
Just slowly but surely, his entire army of 20,000
get a load of that, guys, right?
was reduced to 3,000. Oh my gosh, it's just crazy to me. Now, historians estimate that by the end of 1914, Pancho commanded an army of over 60,000.
We're getting to Roman numbers at this point.
I'm telling you, dude. And he was in control of the land, stretching north to south from the U.S. border to Mexico City and east to west from the Pacific Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico.
But my math... I'm thinking about the shape of Mexico. That's got to be 60%.
40,000 square miles of Mexico.
It's got to be over half of the
way more than half. Yeah, probably 60 to 70% of Mexico he was in control of in 1914.
Damn.
This is a bandit who is now in control. I was just about to say,
this is a guy who, when he was 16, beat the shit out of a guy with a comal to escape being executed and then stole cows.
I'm telling you.
And now he is the president or acting, I don't know, commander-in-chief of 60% of Mexico.
I mean, at the very least, he is in charge of the most powerful army in all of Mexico, which kind of makes him the most powerful person in all of Mexico.
Yeah, and even comparing to other armies in adjacent countries, I mean, one of the more powerful armies in Latin America.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a massive army and a massive piece of land that a former bandit is now in control of.
cattle
Like,
wrestler.
I cannot overstress this.
Can't
Like,
read.
it is just,
He cannot read.
it is unbelievable. Like, the more that I like have processed all through this story, the more that I'm just like, this is one of the most bonkers rags to riches story I've ever seen. But it's also, as we're going to see here, it is almost going to a T follow like a 3-act movie structure. And we're not to the end of Act 2 yet. If you know movie structure. So anyways, it's
so funny.
It is a nutso story. However, the main thing that Carranza had going for him as opposed to Pancho was the financial edge. Carranza still controlled the Yucatan Peninsula, which at the time was one of the global leaders in producing crude oil and materials used for making rope. Two things that were now in huge demand over in Europe, as in August of 1914, World War I had officially kicked off, and Carranza was now basking in the profits.
Bingo. Damn.
Lucky. In the worst way, right? He's
I just
profiting
imagine
off of
like somebody being
millions
like,
of dying people.
Pancho, it seems like Carranza has just gotten, infinitely larger amounts of resources. Look at this chart. And he's like, what does it say? It's like, I just handed it to you. Okay, well, could you read it to me? Yeah. Like, not everybody in the room knows how to read charts, Ted. They're like, oh, God, we are so fucked.
Explain it to me like I'm 5. What if I was a toddler? How would you explain it to a toddler? Like, okay, you generally want the chart, Pancho, to go up and to the right. Oh! I mean, I'm being mean, but you're not far off. You're not far off. Like,
yeah.
Now,
That's so funny.
To double down on his power, Pancho finally met face to face with the leader of the Liberation Army of the South, Emiliano Zapata. Prior to this, they'd only communicated in letters and like telegraphs.
Yeah.
The two officially joined forces to fight against Carranza, but crucially and detrimentally, they did not solidify any political plans for the future of Mexico. And just because the two leaders formed an alliance did not mean that the soldiers in their armies had. This kind of goes back to something that you were asking about, I want to say, in the last episode, okay? Because so many of Pancho's soldiers were former federales and had slaughtered so many of Zapata's men in the past, the Zapatista soldiers started administering their own forms of justice to the former federales. For 3 weeks, Pancho's men killed Zapata's men. Zapata's men killed Pancho's men, and both would take part in political assassinations. This would eventually cause the sitting president of Mexico at the time, and this is a tough name to pronounce, Eulelio is his name, and I did look it up.
Like a Spanish version of Aurelius.
Yeah, that's probably fair. It's spelled Eulalio, Eulelio. Mm-hmm. Okay, anyhow, he was the current sitting president of Mexico, and as a result of all of this strife and this interkilling between these armies, he publicly denounced both Pancho and Zapata.
Yikes.
The alliance of the Convencionistas lasted only a month before it collapsed. But regardless, their military prowess remained strong, and in the month of December 1914, they would take the cities of Puebla, Tamaulipas, and Guadalajara. In fact, Pancho's armies were so fearsome that on many occasions his troops would ride fast into a city shouting, "Viva Villa!" And Carranza's forces were so scared, they simply surrendered. Like, that's how, like, they'd be like, "Viva Villa, Viva Villa!" And they'd just be like, "We're done. Nope, we're good.
Yep,
Hands
nope,
up.
we're good.
Guns
I don't
are
want
down."
that smoke.
Like,
I do not want this smoke.
I'm not messing with this, guys. Like, that was how, like, afraid everyone was basically of Pancho and his army.
I mean, he literally had like the largest standing army in
all of South America, yeah, probably at this point. It's pretty massive. But none of this really seemed to satisfy Pancho. His real goal seemed to be taking down the sitting president, whom he felt was misleading the country. When Pancho's loyal general, Felipe Angeles, took the city of Saltillo, once again, evidence was discovered that President Gutierrez was actually conspiring with Carranza to form a new government. So Pancho ordered his men to arrest the president and have him executed. But the man sent to arrest the president was actually sympathetic to the president's cause. So instead of arresting him, he warned him, which allowed the president enough time to gather his supporters, 10,000 troops, and 10 million pesos before fleeing the city and writing a manifesto condemning Pancho and his deeds. Cracks were beginning to form in Pancho's reputation, and it was becoming more and more obvious to everyone that Pancho had no idea how to run a government and knew only how to resolve issues with violence. Finally, people are seeing it.
Yeah.
Now, regardless, with Gutierrez out of the picture, Pancho placed a new man in charge named Roque Gonzalez Garza as president, but everyone knew Pancho had merely established a puppet regime. Nobody recognized this better than Emiliano Zapata, who started withdrawing his army from the north, leaving Mexico City unoccupied. Soon after, Carranza and his armies seized the opportunity, retaking Mexico City without so much as firing a bullet.
Wow.
Back and forth and back and forth and back. It just is this constant,
Yeah. I think I think sometimes in a, I don't want to say politically stable with all things considered, but a fairly politically stable place that we live in, I think sometimes when you want that crazy social reform, you forget how many other people want that crazy social reform a little bit differently, or don't want it at all, or want it in this way and want it in that way. And then that causes, like you said, back and forth, like almost like waves, ripples. Like if you dropped, 4 rocks in the same pond, it would create ripples from all different directions, causing, instability in all these different axes.
100%. Yeah. And even from the outset of the Mexican Revolution, you had, I said it a second ago, it was like Emiliano Zapata's army. It was like the Liberation Army of the South. They were their own thing. Like they were not necessarily even part of the revolution. They were, but they weren't at the same time. Yeah. So there were these different groups throughout Mexico that were all like, we're for the cause of revolution, but we're not necessarily coordinated. We're not necessarily fighting together. We just know we want to take down the government. So it's a great analogy actually to say, hey, 4 different rocks are getting chucked into a pond simultaneously, or how those ripples cross over and make those weird waves and stuff. It's kind of exactly what was happening. It was just this weird, nobody could quite figure out how to get onto the same page and move forward in this way that they wanted to, know. I think there's a valuable lesson in there, people. For everybody, no matter what political opinion you have, I think there's a good lesson to learn there.
My sister and I were just talking about the same thing. It was just like political activism, charity, with a capital C, that sort of stuff is good. Community is better.
Right.
There's so many times where a political scene could serve you really well, but also just having the right community around you could also serve you in that same way. Yeah. Because then you have other people who are, on the same page with you.
Totally. Now, in spite of all this, Pancho kept up his military campaign, dispatching Felipe Angeles to take the city of Monterrey, and he was brilliantly successful. But fatefully, he sent his old pal, Tomas Urbina, to take the strategically key city of Tampico, and Urbina failed to secure a victory. Do you remember Tomas Urbina?
Ringing a bell.
He's been in and out of the revolution. He's fought with Pancho a good bit. The real key thing to remember was in an episode 1 of this entire series, he and Pancho were a 2-man operation in their bandit days. They were old bandit friends, basically. So, which is really wild to think about as well, that it's like, oh yeah, your old pal Pancho that used to do these just terrible things, but you were basically a contract killer with Pancho back in the day. Now that same guy is the leader of Mexico, basically. Government. And you are a general of an army underneath that guy. It's just the most
crazy.
Holy crap, this is bizarre,
Such a weird rags to riches story.
Really, really weird. Now, for the first time in years, his adversaries started to think that maybe Pancho wasn't quite as invincible as they had all imagined. Soon after this, Carranza's forces retook the city of Guadalajara, and bit by bit, Pancho was losing his grasp on Mexico. Slowly but surely, Carranza's army pushed further north, determined to finally stop Pancho. But Pancho wasn't going to take it lying down and decided to try and retake the city of Guadalajara. But Carranza's main general, Álvaro Obregón, saw it coming and decided to block Pancho's advance in the city of Celaya. And this is one of those where I would be surprised if most people that grew up in Mexico, if I said the Battle of Celaya, they weren't like, oh, what?
Oh, really? Is it like a big historical?
It's like, even if you don't know about it, if I said the Battle of Gettysburg, they'd be like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah, what?
That's
I know
a
that
thing,
battle.
yes.
Like, that's a thing. Like, this is kind of it, right? It's a big deal, the Battle of Celaya. Mm-hmm. Now, Pancho was confident in his victory as his army outnumbered Obregon's 22,000 to 15,000. On April 6th, 1915, the battle began, and initially Pancho thought victory was theirs. But Obregon had studied Pancho's tactics and placed heavy machine guns to block his cavalry charges. Pancho's army did manage to break through the defenses eventually, and Obregon even ordered his bugle player to sound for retreat. But somewhat cartoonishly, Pancho had failed to change up his own musical tune to call for retreat. So his own army thought they were being called to retreat.
Oh, no.
Not Obregon's.
Oh, no. That's the dumbest reason to lose a fight.
It is a little funny, though. You got to admit.
That's the dumbest thing. I've always thought about that. I've always thought about that, as somebody who just like thinks about historical fights and battles constantly. And like, there has to be so many times where like if you think about a heraldry in like, the Middle Ages in England, we think of like Game of Thrones where it's like the wolf and the lion and then this and then that. And then someone's like, in real life, it was like the red flag and the slightly more red flag,
Honestly.
It's like, like heraldry was a lot like that, where it'd be like, this one's a fish and like this one's an even bigger fish and it's blue. And I'm like, how many like peasants with, just a spear and a helmet just absolutely went the wrong direction and got speared because their flag is actually burgundy and not crimson. So yeah, this is a classic example of that.
And I mean, I do have to say, it made me laugh. Like, it was one of those just
that's like a very like Looney Tunes, exactly as you said, like a totally
stupid.
Looney Tunes. Like you've gotten past the cliff and you haven't fallen down because you haven't looked down yet, sort of scenario.
Exactly.
Oh no, that's a terrible way to lose a battle. Oh.
Now, it's not quite over yet, but everyone was confused.
That was my ringtone.
Right? Now, everyone was confused, and Obregon seized the opportunity, going back on the offensive and pushing Pancho's army back. It was Pancho's first personal defeat in years, and he was pissed. Obregon soon caught wind that Pancho was quickly regrouping for a second attack, so he got busy fortifying his defenses even further. On April 13th, Pancho attacked again, and fighting went on for 3 more days as Pancho tried to break through the defenses, but it was no use. Finally, on April 15th, the final nail was hammered into the coffin of Pancho's offensive when Obregon launched a charge of some 6,000 cavalry units he had been holding in reserve. So they were all like fresh up and rested to go.
Yeah.
Pancho's army was overwhelmed and retreated as quickly as possible. When all was said and done, some 6,000 of Pancho's troops had been killed, and another 6,500 were taken prisoner. Pancho's force of 22,000 had been reduced to 9,500 in just 8 days.
Oh my goodness. And we've talked about this with battle tactics too. Like, the most amount of deaths happen once you retreat. Like, retreats are the deadliest military move that you can make when you finally decide to turn your back on an army that is fully outgunning you. Ugh.
Yeah. It was pretty brutal. Now, it was the most devastating defeat of Pancho's life, all the way up until this point. He had never suffered a loss so humiliating. In a violent example of tit-for-tat justice, Pancho's captured officers were rounded up and executed by firing squad, just like Pancho had always done whenever he had won a battle.
Yep.
Many historians refer to the Battle of Celaya as Pancho Villa's Waterloo. which...
That makes sense.
If anybody is not familiar, Waterloo was Napoleon Bonaparte's final battle, basically, where he was finally put down. He didn't die, but his forces were ruined, basically.
Yeah.
But true to his nature, Pancho refused to call it quits. He licked his wounds and for 2 months tried to stage small skirmishes against Obregon's army. Most of his attacks didn't do much damage, and he was low on bullets, so he resorted to firing off artillery whenever he could. On June 3rd, 1915, Pancho really turned up the volume, firing off a massive artillery bombardment aimed at Obregon's army. General Obregon was at a nearby hacienda, and while pacing around the garden, trying to think through his next move, he suddenly felt the massive impact of an artillery shell that had landed only feet from him. At first, he thought everything was okay. But as he looked down, to his horror, he saw that his right arm had been completely blown off.
Whoa.
This is Obregon.
Yeah.
Now, Obregon assumed he was bleeding to death, and in a panic, took his pistol out from its holster, lifted it to his temple, and squeezed the trigger. But nothing happened. Unbeknownst to Obregon, the night before, his personal assistant had cleaned his gun and had removed all the bullets. This simple act saved Obregon's life, as he was then escorted to a hospital where his wound was patched up.
Well, that's
So
nice.
He was, this close.
This close to killing
to
himself
dying
when
and
he
killing
didn't need
himself
to.
when he
That's
didn't need
insane.
to. Okay. And this actually
Unaliving. Sorry.
this had a crazy impact on history, okay? As a fun little aside, Obregon would later serve as the 46th president of Mexico from 1920 to 1924 and was elected again in 1928, but would be assassinated before he could take office.
Wow.
A monument would then be erected where he was assassinated in Mexico City, and all the way up to 1986. The monument contained his severed arm,
It didn't.
which had been collected and preserved in formaldehyde.
That's wild.
Oh, how gross.
That is wild.
You could literally go to the place, the actual monument to him, and be like, there's his arm
That's crazy.
that Pancho Villa blew off in an artillery bombardment. How gnarly is that, dude?
That is totally gnarly.
Now, the very next day, Obregon's armies regrouped and attacked Pancho's forces, taking them completely by surprise.
Don't you mean Obregon's arm?
It
No, it's not multiple. Okay, anyway, go.
It was the final straw that broke the proverbial camel's back of the mighty division of the North. Pancho was on the run, headed north in an attempt to rebuild his army. He was down, but not completely out, and determined to keep fighting. Once the most powerful man in all of Mexico, Pancho was about to be forced back into the life of a bandit, staging only small guerrilla attacks and taking out his anger and revenge on the civilians of Mexico, the very people he had initially sought to liberate. The once great Pancho Villa was beginning to spiral downwards, bordering on madness, which would eventually lead to one of his final assaults. Pancho was about to become something of an international terrorist by attacking New Mexico in the United States of America.
Whoa.
And that's where we'll pick back up for part 5, the conclusion of Pancho Villa.
Wow. Increíble. That was great. I mean,
it's pretty bananas, right? Like, I told you, this guy is crazy.
My favorite part of today's episode was once again talking about like the ins and outs of what a revolution is, the ins and outs of like trying to, make collective change and what that looks like and how, that can go wrong. But also just the idea of Pancho, who is, of course, in his own right, a genius tactician, but him taking on the political power, the largest political power in South America, most likely, at least as far as I know of.
Yeah, possibly.
And he is a cattle rustler. Like, he's literally a cattle rustler. That's insane.
Yeah. Like a true to form cowboy. Like, I keep coming back to, and I know it's a little bit like stereotypical or whatever, but there's this old movie with Humphrey Bogart called The Treasures of the Sierra Madre, or Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And there's this really famous line where Humphrey Bogart is confronted by this big gang of Mexican bandits, and he's like, and they're like, oh yeah, we need to come through because of whatever reason. And Humphrey Bogart says something, oh, well, can I see your badges? And the guy goes, badges? We don't need no stinking badges. And like, that is, and for any film buff out there, the exact scene that I'm talking about, the exact person that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
It's almost exactly how I imagined Pancho when he was like a bandit, was just this dirty, gross looking guy who was rough and tumble, could, shoot an ant from 100 yards away, wore 2 bandoliers across his chest or whatever. That guy becoming the most powerful person in Mexico. It is just a wild idea.
Never give up, kids.
If you can dream it, you can do it.
That's the one only lesson I will tell you to take away from Pancho Villa's life. No other lessons to be had.
Dreams really do come true, kids. No, but it's been a journey of learning about Pancho, because it's like, man, I said at the very beginning of the series, it was like, I wanted to find a definitive hero, and that has not been the story that we've learned about this guy, right? There have been heroic things that have been really cool and like awesome and freedom fighter or whatever, but then ultimately you get to it and you're like, but you're not really a leader. You barely knew what you were doing. You could barely read, which didn't mean you weren't smart, but it just meant that you really did not have any sense for how you actually wanted to see the future of Mexico plan out. Yes. You just had this sort of imaginary image in your head of like, well, it'd be much better if the people had control. So let's just give the people control now. And it was like, everybody else was going, do you know what an economy is? Do you understand how like actual policy work? Do you understand what voting is? Do you know what a Senate is? Like, and him being like, no, just give it to him. Like,
no, I don't. No. Also, no.
And that is what it feels like with Pancho, is that it was just this very like, he had an idea and did some good stuff.
I think it was somebody, who was I thinking of? I think it was like one of the leaders of like Dyson or whatnot, talking about how sometimes it's nice to have somebody in the design room who does not know engineering, because the concepts that they will come up with are so outlandish that they prompt the people who actually know the real science to come up with something that they wouldn't have otherwise, because they'd just be like, oh, that's totally impractical. Why would you do that?
Right.
And sometimes I think about this with like a comedian where they're talking about how like stocks are essentially made up, right? You ascribe a value to a thing and then you put the money in and the money gets bigger, but nothing's really happening. It's just predictions. And sometimes there is a benefit to somebody being like, I don't understand how this, how the stock exchange works. The dollar is going down. Stop that. Make the dollar worth the same. And then they're like, no, we can't. Oh, I mean, we can't do that, right? Can we do that? And there is some value to it, but also like, he is not a man for government. Like, no, you have to understand. And now he's going to attack New Mexico. I'm so curious about that.
Yeah.
It just feels so left field. I think it's just because he's so bitter at this point.
And we'll get obviously into all of it in the final part.
Don't spoil it or anything, but
I will say, when we kind of started out this series, we kind of addressed that it was like, when, for example, I think it was in 2021 or something like that. I have to look up the exact year. But the Mexican government declared it the year of Francisco Villa. And then all these people started coming out and being like, but he was actually kind of a terrible guy. I would actually, more than anything else we've ever seen in the entirety of the series, I would say that in part 5, we're really going to get into the reasons why people say that. He really, man, takes a turn in the latter part of his life where like I kind of said, it's bordering on madness. Like I would say that pretty accurately. Where like
he was a gun,
you're going insane.
Where it's like if it's held in the hand of the right person, it can do good. But as soon as it is no longer, as soon as it becomes aimless, it just becomes a dangerous object.
Yeah.
And I think Pancho was definitely that person where they're like, he did so much good through insane violence.
Right.
Violence that people wanted, violence that people thought was necessary. But that doesn't mean he was a non-violent man.
Right.
And as soon as the reins are off, then we just get the unfiltered, unadulterated Pancho in all of his violent glory.
Absolutely. And yeah, we'll get into all of it in the next episode and everything like that. We'll tie it up here. Like always, a couple things to go over. Again, if y'all are enjoying the show and you want to support us, you can do so by going to our Patreon page. That's going to be patreon.com/thebiographers. If you want to follow us on social media, you can find us on places like TikTok and Instagram and YouTube and all that good stuff. Although I will admit, we've been very lazy about TikTok videos, and I feel like we need to get back onto them, but it's exhausting.
We're on a bi-weekly schedule. There's no excuse anymore.
Except that we both work full-time jobs, and it's tiring, and we have other things to do, and we'll try to.
2 weeks ago.
Yeah, we'll try to do our best, but we've been a little bit lazy about the TikTokings, so we'll try our best to get back into that as well. If anybody has any questions, comments, corrections, you can shoot us an email at thebiographerspodcast@gmail.com. You can find our website, thebiographerspodcast.com. And then, as always, give a little shout out to Akiva and your website. If you have any metalworking or knife making needs, you can go to metalworkbymiola, MEOLA.com. You can use the code biographers at checkout to get 10% off of your order. And how's the stock looking these days?
Dude, we are fully stocked. We've got, I want to say, 12 new hand-forged, ground-polished, sculpted knives on the website. I've also added new add-ons where if you see a knife that you like and you want to get a sheath for it, you can add on a custom Kydex sheath. You can even pick the color.
Sick.
And like I said, biographers use the code biographers at checkout. That'll get you 10% off, which is a pretty significant discount.
Nice little
considering especially if you're getting like one of those larger Damascus sets. I made this gorgeous Damascus set using curly maple that has been dyed a charcoal black. Like it looks like sort of a charcoal finish with this navy blue bolster and 120 layer like deep coffee etched Damascus. Sweet. It's really pretty. So check out the website for that. Also check out Hardy and Fuller. We're pretty much fully booked out, but we're going to have some new classes. I'm going to do a Higa no Kami friction folder knife, very similar to the one that I made for you, actually.
Sweet.
I'm going to be teaching that as a class here soon. So if you want to take a class with me, check out Hardy and Fuller.
And you should. That's how Akiva and I became friends initially, was I took a blacksmithing class, and then we became pals, and here we are several years later, which is crazy to think about,
Several years and thousands maybe of pages of writing later. We've been running this podcast now.
Probably, yeah, something. I would guess that between you and I, we probably have a good like 300 pages of writing would be my guess at this point.
I know I generally hit like 150.
But you're double spaced.
I do MLA, which still counts. MLA is the standard, and I do 150 pages per series.
Okay, well if I double spaced
Daniel like writes on like
as well.
8-point font and single spaced.
Yeah,
which I don't understand.
Yeah, I think it's 10-point font single space, but yeah. And anyways, whatever. It doesn't matter.
What standard is that, huh? Like, what are we doing here? Anyway, okay, that is
novel,
off-show
that is
stuff. Let's get
standard.
off of here. It was so great to see you guys. I hope you guys have a lovely day.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. We'll see you next time. And remember, as always, ignorance is not stupidity. It is the absence of knowledge. And I do hope you all learned something today.
See ya!
You've been listening to The Biographers. For more information, please visit thebiographerspodcast.com.